Well, hello everybody. How are you doing today? I certainly hope you're doing fine. And I'm doing fine myself. Glad to be with you once again. I tell you, and I would like to welcome all of you to another episode of TJ's Topics. I really appreciate you being with me. I consider it a joy, an honor, and a privilege to be able to come into your presence on any given occasion. Now, today I have a topic that I would like to share with you, and the topic is the church is good at covering up dirt. And you may already know where I'm going with this. But as this old preacher in Memphis said a long time ago, it's the truth anyhow. The church is good at covering up dirt. Now, what kind of dirt are they good at covering up? Well, let's find out, shall we? The question I have for today is, what can we do if we find that the church we attend is about the business of sweeping dirt under the rug? What would you do if you found out that you were a part of a church that did such things or did such a thing? How would you feel about that? And of course, this is from a metaphorical perspective, although some people might think that the church would literally sweep dirt under a rug. Like when we were kids, that's how we thought. Any organization or organism will fight hard to protect itself. The kind of cover up we have seen by church leadership is practiced throughout society. If we continue to look up to pastors, bishops, apostles, ministers, and even deacons, simply because they have been ordained and stand in the place of Christ, speaking on God's behalf, and refuse to hear whatever complaints that may come forward from parishioners, then ultimately the abuse of their authority and power will continue. And of course, this has happened time and time again in the church. Regardless of what the denomination is, what the size of the congregation is, we have seen time and time again where those who hold positions of power and authority have abused their power. And the people who suffered the most were the members, and that's really sad. When we put clergy on a pedestal of holiness, refusing to question the decisions they make or hold them accountable for their actions, then we become part of the problem ourselves. Of course, we like to trust people, and beginning in early childhood, we are conditioned to trust those who are in positions of authority, especially those who are of the house of prayer, or as the Bible would say, the household of faith. However, we also need to use discernment and recognize when something about the so-called man of God or the so-called house of God is not right. We need to know when they are not in right standing according to biblical and spiritual standards. Now, sometimes that may be a little difficult to see because, a lot of times we get so caught up in personality, and what I've noticed in the 21st century is that most of these churches, especially these big name churches, and mega churches in particular, they're all about building their brand or upholding the brand that they've already built. and the pastor himself is part of that brand. Well, if the pastor falls or any other major upheaval takes place within that fellowship, then the entire brand, I mean, the whole thing is going to collapse. So, and you would think it wouldn't be like that, but it can be if we're not careful. Now, here are some examples of the type of dirt that the church tends to cover up. Number one, and this is probably the biggest one of all, sexual abuse, particularly when it involves a pastor and the abuse of an underage child, which we would call pedophilia. And speaking of pedophilia, we still got this Epstein thing going on, with Donald Trump, the Epstein files. And it seems like they're trying to do the same thing, covering up pedophilia, which is just a huge stain on this country. Well, that can also be a huge stain on any church or any denomination. Number two, financial mismanagement, taking the funds that have been raised and using them to enrich themselves. And we've seen a lot of pastors do that. A lot of these mega preachers, and I'm not even going to begin to call names, but they have used money to fund vacations and cars and mansions and private jets, you name it. And I could go on and on about that, but I won't. Number three, silencing their victims, making those in the congregation who have suffered some type of abuse to sign an NDA, which is a non-disclosure agreement, to prevent them from speaking, because if those people start running their mouth and talking to folks, if that news is going to get into certain people's ears, which could ultimately lead to the media showing up, the news coming out, wanting to interview folks in the church or talk to the pastor themselves. And they don't want that. Therefore, they have to make those victims sign this non-disclosure agreement and perhaps buy their silence. They may pay them off, give them some money. That's hush money, so they won't talk. Number four, hiding assets. They will stow away tons of money, then lie and say that that there are missing funds. And I will give you an example of that. You look at what happened down there at Lakewood a few years back, Lakewood Church in Houston, Joel Osteen, the mega pastor. And they found all that money hidden away behind the wall. It was a plumber who found it. And you probably remember, over, what was it, $600,000 buried deep inside the wall of a restroom in the church. And yet they said that they didn't know where that money went. It was hidden in the wall. My goodness. If I had been that plumber. Number five, protecting hierarchy. Protecting the church's reputation or brand, because that's basically what it is. That's what it's all about. And finally, number six, lack of transparency, refusing to disclose important information regarding the usage of offerings and contributions. Like if people in the congregation want to see a detailed statement of how their funds and their contributions are being utilized, and those in positions of authority, such as the pastor and ministers and deacons, they don't want to disclose that information. That's a telltale sign that they're doing something with that money that they have no business. And I'm sure that there are probably other examples as well, but those are the ones that I have for today. So this concludes today's topic. The church is good at covering up dirt. And if you are part of a church that is guilty of covering up dirt, sweeping dirt under the rug, metaphorically speaking, you may want to start looking for the nearest exit, because I'm here to tell you that things most likely will not get any better. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of TJ's Topics. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you again next time, okay? This is Taryn Jerome Harris, reminding you that every round goes higher and higher. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.